afternoon everyone, and welcome to this Change Board webinar. How can HR help create an ethical business culture? My name is Mary Appleton and I'm Change Board's Deputy Editor here in the UK. Today we're pleased to be joined by Kate Lander, Head of Education at the CFA Institute, who's going to explore the role HR has to play in strengthening culture in financial services, promoting ethical conduct and greater knowledge among employees. Kate will be looking at how HR can help financial services earn trust and restore reputation, why fostering communication between business functions can drive success, how you can ensure your employees understand risk effectively, and why investing in your own financial knowledge can have real benefits for your own HR career. Before we begin, we're just going to run through a few guidelines. We'll be running a Q&A with Kate at the end of the presentation. So if you do have any questions or comments, please enter these using the questions box at the right-hand side of your screen and click send. We'll also be live tweeting as we go through the webinar, so if you'd like to join the conversation, please credit your tweets with the hashtag HRCulture. That's hashtag HRCulture. And just a reminder, we'll be sending the recorded version of this webinar to all attendees shortly after, so please do look out for that in the next few days. So all that's left for me to do is hand over to Kate. Kate.
Well, Mary, thank you, and thank you for the introduction, and indeed to Change Board for arranging this session this afternoon. And thank you to all of those of you on the line as well. Very much welcome this opportunity to have this discussion this afternoon. So in terms of today's session, what we want to be covering is, first of all, we're going to start off by addressing the crisis that is facing the financial services industry. But instead of focusing on the normal inflation headlines around unemployment, GDP growth, or the latest economic data that's been released, I want to focus on the state of trust within our industry. At the CFA Institute, we truly believe that the lack of trust is going to hamper the recovery of our industry and therefore the wider economy. There needs to be some fundamental changes to the culture within the industry, and we genuinely believe that our partners in HR and the wider teams within organisations are key for helping to make these changes happen. As an institute, we've been a long-term and perhaps vocal proponent on ethics through exams like our CFA programme, which tests the topic at all three levels as candidates go through. But ethics is far deeper than simply a study session or an exam question. So in this session, we want to look at some of the evidence around the current standing of ethics within our industry. And finally, we want to wrap up by talking about the resiliency and building resilience for the future. And we want to talk about how human resources can play a key role in that and therefore helping to shape the future of our industry. So without further delay, let's kick off with a look at the state of the current crisis in our industry. Since 2008 and that historic day in September with the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the financial services industry around the globe has been dogged by headlines. Many of these have focused on the larger economy, with stories of high unemployment, austerity measures. Austerity is a word that I think many of us had never heard of before this financial crisis. We've seen continued low growth hitting economies and stories of never-ending recessions. But strangely, many of us are old enough, well at least I am, to remember previous recessions. So what's different now, and why hasn't the recovery happened as quickly as many economists predicted back in 2008? Well, one of the key differences that we've noticed is that this time around, many of these headlines have been focused around behaviours, whether it be herd actions around LIBOR fixing, the manipulation of foreign exchange rates, or more individual misdemeanours like, just in the last few weeks, Paul Flowers, the former chairman of the Co-op Group. The list seems never-ending of these headlines around behaviour within our industry. But it isn't just about these headlines. This isn't just about the press making a mountain out of a molehill. The facts are also in numbers. The Daily Telegraph just recently reported that the top fines for banks in the UK is running above £9 billion so far just in 2013. That includes $1.5 billion for UBS over LIBOR rigging, almost another billion for JP Morgan over the trading scandal. So it's unsurprising that this continual stream of bad press around financial services has led to a breakdown in trust of the industry amongst investors and the public at large. But is there any evidence about what people think? Well, in the summer of this year, CFA Institute joined with Edelman to look at the issue of trust. And we investigated the attitude towards institutional and retail investment firms across the Hong Kong, UK and USA. So the Edelman Trust Barometer, as it's known, we've just put there on the right of the screen. And basically this barometer looks at the percentage of respondents who said that they trusted each of these industries that's been listed in the chart. The results are, to be honest, quite saddening, ranking the trust felt by respondents in the financial services sector the lowest of all industries within this annual survey. To put it into context, if you look at some of the other industries there, that puts us below media, which is ranked pretty low at the moment. Just to pick out one particular point from the report, in the UK, only 39% of UK retail investors trust the financial services industry. Only 39%. But what does this really mean to customers, and what possibly could the long-term impact be, and therefore why do we need to do something about it, and why we feel that HR are able to play a key part in this? In any relationship, there is a level of trust, whether that's the trust that you have in your spouse, your work colleague, maybe the supplier to your business, or whoever you interact with on a day-to-day basis. And just like every other relationship, the financial services industry has a relationship with those that it serves, and that relationship needs trust. And at the moment, that trust has clearly been eroded. But what is that relationship? What is the broader purpose of the financial services industry? What should its relationship be with those that it serves? We believe there are two important roles for the finance industry within the wider society. The first of those is to serve investors. That means to act responsibly, to manage the balance between return and risk for those investors. But we also think it means to provide growth to an economy, and that means creating jobs and investment in the community. Over the last 5 years, really since that fateful 2008 and the collapse of many banks, the relationship between finance professionals and those that it serves does seem to have been broken. Organisations, as well as their employees, have been accused of acting in their own interests and ahead of those investors and customers. It seems, and just looking at the picture on the screen of people queuing up to take their money out of a bank, investors and savers no longer trust banks. They no longer trust them to manage their savings or their retirement funds. But this isn't just about a queue in one day. It's not just about the short term. This could have some serious long-term impacts, with the fear and mistrust driving defensive and short-term investing. So what should financial organisations become in the future, and therefore what role can HR play? Well, trying to be a little bit more positive after that perhaps rather doom and gloomy opening, finance can be a force for good in society. If the industry pursues that broader purpose, we believe it can provide many, if not all, of the things on this slide. For example, the industry can help people save for their future, whether that be the saving to go on holiday, whether that be the saving for retirement, to save to buy a home. We believe it can fund schools, hospitals, roads and other essentials to society. It can enable entrepreneurs to turn great ideas into products and services. But it can also back business leaders of tomorrow, inspire. So the financial services does play a vital role in society as a whole. But how do we get to this point? How do we get to this point where trust is restored? Well, there needs to be a change. That change must be driven in culture, not product, technology or service. That change requires the creation of a culture based on integrity and mutual understanding. And that's why we're here talking to HR today. Because if we are going to move this industry forward, it is incumbent upon everyone within the industry to align their personal and organisational values with those that serve their clients, their shareholders, as well as the greater needs of society. The finance industry needs to shift its focus from short-term goals and short-term incentive structures. We need to aspire, we need to adopt values that are going to create more resilient firms and a stronger future for the finance industry. So why here? Why now? Why are we talking to you today? Well, we believe that human resources can be a strong enabling force to help lead the labour force, create employee engagement, focus on talent development amongst the workforce within an organisation. We need you to help drive through this change, to help to align professional and business values. So it's a big ask, and really that the next two parts of the presentation are going to focus on two areas, what this practically means to you. So we're going to take a look at ethics and then move on to business resiliency. I just want to at this point share a quote by Robert Potter. Robert is the chairman of the City HR Association here in the UK. He recently shared that reform in the financial services industry ultimately means hiring a different sort of person. This isn't about launching a new product. This isn't about buying a new technology, putting in place some more infrastructure. This is about the people that are hired within our organisation. We believe that different sort of person is an ethical one, and that's really why we're looking to engage with you today. Often, one of the messages we do hear, though, is that HR as a function has perhaps struggled to gain buy-in from some leadership teams. They struggle sometimes to stress the importance of some of the practices and processes that maybe focus on ethics. They're just not getting the ear of senior leaders, or at least getting some budget committed to it, some plans put in concrete. So what we wanted to do was to share some evidence to support some of these ideas. Now, just last week, the Economist Intelligence Unit, get my words out, released a report sponsored by CFA Institute entitled "A Crisis of Culture, Valuing Ethics and Knowledge in Financial Services." We've provided a link here on the slide in front of you and an image of the report, so please feel free to download. You'll see a lot of the areas that we're about to cover within that report. The study itself covered 382 financial services executives, 50 executives from supporting industries, as well as a series of in-depth interviews. So this wasn't just short-form questions. This tried to dig down a little bit deeper. So let's have a look at some of the results from the report in a little bit more detail. Okay, so on this page, we've picked out 4 questions. Just to stress, these are just 4 questions from the many that were addressed in the report. So how did it work? So lots of information on the screen there. Let me just walk through how these questions ran to begin with. Everyone had to answer each of these questions. The results were then converted into percentages. So each of those horizontal bars adds up to 100%. It kind of allocates the views of the group as a whole. People were allowed to respond from a range of strongly disagree to strongly agree. Obviously there were a couple of fence sitters or don't knows. These 4 questions that I've picked out here just address some of the different areas of focus. And interestingly, in many ways, are actually going to produce some quite conflicting results. So, let's kick off with the first question. When asked whether aspiring to a set of globally recognized standards, whether that would make the financial services industry more resilient, a massive 91% either agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. So for those of you that are looking at the screen, that's the lilac-y sort of blue and deeper purple blocks that you can see there. So that sounds a pretty promising message, pretty encouraging. There's clearly commitment to ethics and following that approach. So let's have a look at the second question. This indicates the reluctance perhaps to adhere to a formal code, because when asked whether being rigid over professional standards will make their firms less resilient, the majority, that was 53% in this case, either agreed or strongly agreed. So that's the majority saying that they think it will hold their firm back, make it less competitive. So when it comes to committing to that code of standards, it does seem to indicate there's a little less support. Perhaps it's actually the third question that certainly worries me the most, and certainly throws up perhaps the most questions around the culture within a financial organisation. In the third question on the screen there, we asked if it would be difficult to make career progression without being flexible on ethical standards, to which 53% agreed or strongly agreed. Now, I interpret that as people are potentially having to compromise on their ethics, or at least feel that they have to compromise on those ethics in order to advance their career. The final question there on the screen, the fourth question, the fourth bar down. When asked whether they would prefer for a firm that has a good reputation for ethical conduct or to work for a bigger, more profitable firm, but perhaps with questionable ethical standards, overwhelming 96% agreed or strongly agreed that they would rather work for that firm with a good reputation. So what can we take away from that? I think there seem to be a few conflicts there. To me, the top and the bottom questions seem to indicate a strong belief in the importance of ethics, and indeed, perhaps a desire to work for those organisations that display some strong ethical behaviour. However, those middle two questions, those ones over about making the firm less competitive and career progression, seem to indicate that some of those adherents to ethical standards, or perhaps a code, certainly respondents seem to feel that it might hold their firms back or themselves as individuals. But this isn't the only area of conflict that was thrown up within this Economist Intelligence Unit report. Just moving on to the next page and a couple of pie charts that we've put up there. The report also questioned executives really here regarding reputation. Now, before we look at these graphs, I just want to remind you of something I shared earlier on. We shared the results of that Edelman Trust Barometer. Remember where it ranked the financial services and banking industry against all those other industries, whether it be media or technology or whatever. Just remember that stat that I shared. 39%, only 39% of UK retail investors had any trust in the investment industry. And remember that financial services was ranked bottom in that barometer. Yeah, we got the lowest rating. So let's look at these pie charts and let's see what the messages are between these two and how that fits into what we heard from the Edelman survey. Well, the chart on the left, this one asked respondents how their firm's current reputation for ethical conduct compared to the rest of the industry. So this question focused on how these executives thought their firm compared. A massive 71% said that they were better than the rest of the industry. Now, without getting a little bit techie, that in itself is a bit of a contradictory to me, because 71% are saying that they're better than the rest. Well, in reality, only 50% can really be better than the other 50%. So there certainly seems to be a bit of overconfidence in each firm. They all seem to think that they're better than everybody else. The chart on the right, on the other hand, shifts the focus a little bit. This chart on the right this time asked respondents to rate the financial service industry's current reputation for ethical conduct. So this time we're not focusing on those firms like we were on the pie chart on the left, but this time we're focusing on that industry, the industry's current reputation. Now here the respondents, 59% of whom felt that the view was positive, and another 27% felt it was neutral. So that means only 14% felt that the attitude towards the financial services industry was actually negative. Now that seems to be a massive contrast to those barometer results from the Edelman survey. So it does seem to be an awful amount of overconfidence by the leaders of these organisations, both in their firm's reputation, but also of that of the industry. Okay, well, is it all bad news? And what can HR do to help us in this? There are some positive steps, and although the picture that we're painting is, let's be honest, far from rosy, there is some clear evidence that the industry is making an effort to tackle some of these issues. So have we got any positive signs of change? Well, just still sticking with our Economist Intelligence Unit report, we asked just on the next page here, we asked the executives what steps their firms had taken, and this was over the last 3 years, so it's not just a very recent thing, it is over the last 3 years, but what steps they've taken to try and improve employees' adherence to ethical standards. Now let me again just explain how this chart works. These bars represent the percentage of people that picked each of these responses. Now it's important to note that in this question people could pick more than one response. So that's why the results don't add up to 100%, because people could have picked 3 or 4 of these. So let's have a look at the results. Well, 67% at the top there, that top green bar, responded that they have raised awareness of the importance of ethical conduct by all employees. Sounds pretty encouraging. A few less, just at 63%, they said they'd introduced or strengthened a formal code of ethical conduct. Again, that sounds pretty promising to me. 61%, third bar down, had cited that they had introduced or strengthened the system for evaluating employee conduct. So I'm pretty heartened by those. However, the fourth bar down, only 41% committed to having introduced financial or career incentives around adherence to ethical standards. And that's really where the call comes to HR. There are some very promising messages here. CFA Institute is heartened by 63% citing they've introduced or strengthened a formal code for ethical conduct. But we and the system really needs HR to help us change that last point. Without changing financial or career incentives to at least map and even possibly support ethical behaviour within financial organisations, we think we're going to really struggle to really affect a true change within our culture. In fact, the last point within the executive summary of the Economist Intelligence Unit report, which, as I say, would be great to have a download and have a look, well, the last conclusion that they shared was that senior executives need to ask whether the power to really influence and shape their firms is shared widely enough. And they actually question who should be in charge. Should it really be those bankers and traders or investment professionals, or should it be those that keep the risks in check? And that includes human resources, compliance or risk management. So the challenge for firms is to ensure that they are run by experts, and that is experts in everything that the firm does. And a firm does a lot of things. It generates revenue, but it also manages human individuals and manages risk. Okay, well, in order to provide a little bit of interaction as we approach halfway through the session, but also perhaps give you a break from me talking, we're now going to get involved in a little bit of audience participation.
Hi everyone, so we have got a quick poll for everyone to participate in. The question is, do HR teams have enough financial services industry knowledge to be confident to challenge their business partners? It's an easy one, there's only 2 options here, so please click yes or no and click vote. Let us know your thoughts. Just wait for the last couple of people to get their voting in. Okay, fantastic. Right, the results are in. Wow, an overwhelming majority think no. Okay, I'll hand back over to Kate to discuss the results.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, that's really useful feedback, and thank you very much for participating. So, well, hopefully that's kind of teed us up into the last part of our session this afternoon. How really HR can help provide and play a key role in shaping some of the changes that we're asking, and really one of the things where we feel we need your help is in, I guess, a group of topics that we've labelled building resilience. So what do we need to do? Well, efforts to improve financial knowledge among financial services employees can be challenging. I myself spent 8 years in the training industry and totally appreciate some of the challenges that are out there. But I think recently there's some extra problems arisen. Dramatic cost cutting since the onset of the financial crisis back in 2008 has seen hundreds and thousands in the sector lose their jobs. Just to share some data there, that since the fourth quarter of 2008, 132,000 jobs have been lost in the UK and 380,000 in the US. But what does that really mean? Well, one of the issues is that as firms shed employees, they also tend to rely more heavily on outsourcing partners, often to carry out processes that were handled internally. That often places a heavier burden on those remaining staff to control the activities of outside companies, of which they're relying on increasingly. We also therefore end up with knowledge gaps, such as not knowing what other departments are up to. We've seen a huge growth and globalization of banks. That the number of banks out there and financial organizations out there has shrunk enormously as we've ended up with these huge conglomerates of just vast businesses. So we have these knowledge gaps appearing between departments. And our biggest concern as an institute is that these can increase the risk levels. In fact, looking at some of the data that came out of the Economist Intelligence Unit report indicated that 6 out of 10 that respondents, that's 60%, say that they feel that their firm faces a serious threat from gaps in employees' knowledge. Also, nearly 60% of the respondents also accepted that better industry knowledge is crucial to making their firm more resilient to risk, and essential to understanding the increasingly risky and complex environment we find ourselves in. So those report indications really, I think, back up with just that small poll that we did on this afternoon session, that people feel that there needs to be more knowledge, whether that be to go to work and to go about their day-to-day job, or in the case of HR professionals on this session today, in order to make some of those changes. But let's just take a position of why now? Well, the Economist Intelligence Unit survey also asked respondents what their top 5 reasons were for needing to improve that knowledge within the financial services industry. So this hopefully arms you with some evidence as to why that knowledge needs to be bridged and those gaps need to be filled. So just to clarify this diagram here and what we're trying to show, people were asked to provide 5 reasons. And what we've selected here are those most popular answers. So effectively those numbers, 25, 31, etc., show the percentage of people that gave each of those answers. So let's walk through. In 5th place is customer satisfaction. I suppose at least that did get 25% of the vote. Next most popular, with 31%, selecting that the jobs have become more specialised. I think that's often a result of financial products becoming more complex. Certainly when I began work in the financial markets, the array of derivative products, the array of complex instruments was far, far fewer. Number 3rd in the responses, with 39%, was the increased globalisation of the industry. Just from an aspect of things like regulation, compliance with rules, that's made things a lot more difficult. Number 4th, coming into the top 2 here, so number 4 down, and the second best and the second highest response in terms of 49% of all recipients citing it, was the increased role of technology and automation. Now I actually think there's quite a link there between the specialisation point as well, that actually what technology has enabled is a lot of perhaps the old manual work to be undertaken via technology, and therefore that's created slightly more specialised and detailed jobs. But let's have a look at that last one. The most popular response by half the people surveyed was that it's actually the increasingly complex risk environment which drives that need to improve knowledge. So there really is a need. This isn't a case of we need more money and budgets have been cut. This is a case of, in order to protect our industry, in order to manage risk, we need to do something better. There definitely seems to be evidence that a better understanding is required, and that's really where we need human resources to play a critical role in shaping the resilience. But what does that knowledge need to cover? I mean, it's all very well us sitting here saying, yes, we need to do more training, we need to plug those gaps, we need to bridge those departments so that people understand what's going on, but what do we need to cover? Well, still sticking with our Economist Intelligence Unit, we asked them 2 questions. So let's take a look at the left-hand side chart to begin with. This one's all about career advancement. We asked people what would help them most. So which of the following do you think would help you most in advancing your career within the financial services industry? Well, the most popular answer, so the light or the bright blue segment there at the bottom, 41% of the vote, was to increase their knowledge of other functions within their firm. So that's saying that they need to bridge those gaps between departments. The second most popular answer, with 37%, still a very strong response, was to improve knowledge of issues closer to their role. And then finally coming in third, but with still a reasonable chunk of the vote at 22%, was actually improving their knowledge of the industry as a whole. Okay, so before we analyse those too much, let's have a look at the right-hand side. And this question was all about improving the resilience of their firm. So not about their individual career, but this time around their firm. Again, the question, which of the following do you think would help the most in improving the resiliency of your firm? The most popular answer here was actually 59%, was to actually improve the knowledge of the industry as a whole. Second, with 32%, so again still pretty sizable, was to increase the knowledge of other functions within their firm. and just 8% voted for the improving of issues closer to their own role. But I think that kind of reflects the different style of questions. So what should we interpret from this? What does it mean? Well, I think first of all, people perceive different needs for their own growth or to improving the resiliency of their firms. But importantly, there is some overlap. And I think what we can take away from this is that much of these requirements and what people think is going to make the biggest difference is focusing on broadening out that level of financial knowledge. There doesn't seem to be a huge cry from these survey results on specific on-the-job training, learning how to do their role. People seem to be competent at that. People are experts in what they do and what their small niche or their little silo is. There seems to be a call for a broadening or a better understanding that can help individuals understand where they fit into their organisation, where they fit into the industry, and where their firm fits in or interacts with their industry. So as HR individuals and professionals, well, what should you focus on? I just want to turn your attention now to a slightly different survey, and this was actually one that CFA Institute undertook just last year, back in 2012, and this time we focused on a slightly more qualitative survey. So no more stats, no more numbers for a moment, but our survey went across Asia, Europe and North America because we wanted to better understand the educational needs within firms. We wanted to assess and determine if non-investment professionals, but still working within financial institutions or supporting financial institutions, needed to know about the investment industry. And if so, what would be the benefits of doing so? What would be the benefits of HR championing this educational program? Well, the research that we undertook identified 5 key drivers consistently amongst all those that we questioned. And we think that HR can provide a vital role in driving these forward. So let's take a look at them just very briefly in turn. First and foremost, I think, is the light bulb moment in the middle of the picture there, and what we call a need for clarity. I think this is actually very much in line with the results that we've seen from the Economist Intelligence Unit survey that we've shared in the session this afternoon. People need to and want to understand the bigger picture. The world has become more complex. Globalization, technology, developments of complex markets has made sure of that fact. We genuinely feel that people want and need to understand the world in which they work. If not, new ideas will come in, new products will appear, and there is a risk they will fall between the gaps. The second one, top left there on the screen, is the creation of a shared understanding and professional responsibilities. We need to close the gaps in knowledge in order to reduce the risks. Many organizations still operate in these silos, and by creating bridges between departments, we genuinely feel that a better understanding can build teams and help actually create better risk management. But it's not all about the prevention of problems. Improving standards can also help develop performance at a firm-wide and industry level. So improving that performance, bottom left on your screen. Again, I think this is very much in line with the results of the Economist Intelligence Unit that we saw a couple of pages ago, where people are really saying that this can improve and drive the competitiveness of their firm. Okay, so a couple more to go, just flicking over to the right-hand side of the screen there. And here we focus on one of the key areas to come out of our survey was to improve the confidence of employees in making the right decisions. Those that understand what they are doing will have more confidence, and they're more likely to champion best practice. Those that don't and maybe lack that confidence are likely to be swayed by the loudest voice, and that isn't always the right voice. And finally, just at the bottom there, the opportunity for organizations as well as individuals to stand out. to stand out amongst the crowd, and really we want to make sure that organisations stand out and change the trust within our industry. So let's just take a moment to wrap up this afternoon. And before we summarise some of the key takeaways, just to share another comment with you from Peter Cheese, the Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. He was recently cited within our Economist Intelligence Unit report as saying that the real challenge is not to ensure non-banking staff understand finance, but to ensure business leaders, whether their roles are in HR, IT or more core banking functions, are taking genuinely shared responsibility for the purpose, culture and strategic direction of the business. So let's just recap those three areas that we set out to cover this afternoon. First of all, the industry being in crisis, not necessarily the macroeconomic crisis, but the crisis of trust. Only 39%, remember, of UK retail investors trust our industry now. However, the point I want to share with you and reiterate is that leadership teams may not appreciate or choose to admit that problem. Remember, when questioned, only 14% thought that the view on the industry was negative. As human resources, you have a key role to play in communication. We need you to create communication channels to share these messages, work on employee engagement, and empower those customer-facing employees to speak up. The next thing we took a look at was the importance of ethics, to change the culture and improve that adherence to ethics. We think the inclination is there. Remember, 91% of executives supported the notion that ethical standards will make the industry more resilient. However, it also seems that those in revenue-earning functions definitely appear to lack some conviction when committing to a code, perhaps especially when they think it might impact the achievement of some short-term revenue goals or possibly their incentives. As HR professionals, you are pivotal to this change in culture. From the people that you hire, through to the performance measurement systems you put in place, career development structures, reward and incentive programs. Everything is going to drive that adoption of ethics. And finally, building resilience. There was collective agreement in our survey with the Economist Intelligence Unit that a better understanding will help firms more resilient to risk. As HR professionals, we need you to bridge those gaps in knowledge, as well as the cultural points that we've discussed. So, although we started this session with some pretty bad news, talking about the crisis our industry is in and the lack of trust customers seem to have in our financial organisations, without changing the culture, we won't restore that trust. We won't restore the trust that our customers place in us. Without that level of trust, markets will continue to be short-term and volatile. Short-term and volatile markets create very short-lived growth and inconsistent growth, and that's going to stifle our society. So the future of finance lies with all of us. It's human resources, regulators, industry leaders, organisations like ours, CFA Institute. But the point that I want to stress is that unless we act cohesively, we're not going to change culture and we're not going to shape the future of our industry. So perhaps with that slight rallying call at the end, I'd like to thank you all for the attention this afternoon and interest in this topic. And with that, I'd like to open the floor to questions and offer my many thanks to you for joining this afternoon. So with that, I'd like to hand back to Mary, who I believe will be able to answer questions.
Thanks, Kate, for a really fascinating presentation. It certainly provoked some debate among our attendees here. I must say I couldn't help raise a smile actually when you mentioned that people have lost trust in banks. Indeed, only last night when I was trying to pay for my grocery shopping and I couldn't use my card, I'm one of the customers of a well-known bank. That was quite frustrating. Okay, so let's move on to some questions. Steve has emailed in. He would like to know, when you're talking about ethics, Kate, when you use that word ethics, what are you referring to? Can you give us some examples, perhaps, of ethics and ethical behaviour?
Yeah, sure, and I think that is a very key question, and thanks for Steve for raising that. I think the first thing is, and it is a fairly obvious point, but nonetheless to stress, that ethics is not regulations. And that's very key. And in fact, I'd even go further than that, because perhaps a good illustration of that is something that can be legal or within regulations might not actually be ethical. It's interesting. One of the ways that we sometimes talk about it is if your mother asked whether you do it, would you be able to look her in the eye and say yes? So ethics isn't about regulations. It's not about following the law, and that's why this goes beyond just compliance. It goes beyond just following the FCA regulations or whatever market you're operating in. This is more about doing the right thing for your stakeholders within your business. This is much more about putting the interests of your clients ahead of your own or those of your organization. So it isn't just about following the law, it's about what is doing right. Now, that makes it also somewhat difficult, because it means that, unlike a regulation where you can dig out the rule book and have a look at what the exact details says, it isn't quite as cut and dry. And in fact, that's one of the challenges in an exam program like our very own CFA program, is that it isn't cut and dry. People don't tend to like it because there's no clear-cut rules to learn, but there is some definite code of conduct that you can put around, and that's simple things like, as simple as putting those clients' interests ahead of those of the individuals within an organization or the organization itself. It's always putting the customer first, and really that's almost the stopgap that we'd put behind it. So it isn't about regulations, it's about doing the right thing, fairly, whether that means the right balance between risk and return. It's very hard for regulations to say, they can specify what instruments a certain client, a retail client, can invest in. This isn't about specifying what are suitable, because rules are always there to be stretched. Bankers are smart people. They'll come up with a new product that deviates from a regulation. This should always be that stopgap. It's, well, I know the rules say that I can do it, but is it ethical? Is it the right thing for the customer or the client?
Okay, thank you, Kate. Another question has come in from Emily. Emily says, if HR is to rebuild trust and ensure ethical standards are abided by, how can HR gain a voice and be taken notice of within their organisation?
Okay, well again, another great question, and thanks to Emily. I think the first thing is that HR does have a responsibility, but it is part of a wider team. So I don't want anyone to come off this session believing that they are the sole responsibility. It's much more about HR are one of the key players within this. But in terms of gaining that voice, I accept, and as I said, it's something that we hear quite frequently. And I think the key thing is to try and deliver clear messages. That's one of the reasons we wanted to share that Economist Intelligence Unit report with the audience today, that we actually feel that there are some really key messages, some facts. Okay, this isn't a straw poll of 20 people. This isn't just a small selection. This is close to 400 executives within financial organizations, backed up by in-depth interviews. It should provide HR with some evidence. I think it is about making the leadership team appreciate that this isn't just looking after people. This is about looking after the industry and their firm. Without restoring the trust, the industry is not going to be resilient to the future. The industry isn't going to grow, and with that the firm isn't going to grow. And if that takes a fairly obvious statement of pointing out that they're not going to make any money, well that's really, I think, what that voice has to be. So I think sort of our key message is that HR, it's not just their job, it's the job of everybody, whether it be institutes like ours, the regulators, the much wider body. But we can't do it without HR, because this is as much around performance plans, incentive plans, employee engagement, but we need to get them at the table. And I think in order to help people help HR professionals get to that table, they need a story. They need to have a story that leaders are going to listen to and understand. And unfortunately, sometimes just saying that it will make their workforce better people falls on deaf ears a little bit. And that's why I think by using some of these facts, by using some of the statistics, by putting it together in a story to present, hopefully it will start to get that ear of the leaders and help them understand what a key part, an essential part that HR is to play in affecting this change.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Another question has come in. What do you see as the relationship between ethics and values in organisational terms?
Golly, that's an interesting one. In terms of the relationship, I think that the two are very much intertwined. I would say ethics is a little bit more about a behavioural aspect and about how one conducts oneself, and I think that's why ethics very much leads to a code of conduct, very much that sort of approach of how and a structure around how to do things. I think values is much more around a messaging and a belief and things that people hold internally. The two, I think, are very much intertwined. I don't think without management demonstrating strong values in the organisation, committing some very clear messages around values, what's important, what drives, what they should mean to their clients, what they mean to their customers, what they stand for, what they feel is most important within an organisation. Without those messages being seen and supported by senior management, I think it's always going to be very hard to get that code of ethical behaviour committed to by every employee in the firm. So I think to summarise, I mean, I think, and I hope that that addresses the question that was raised, I actually see them very much as intertwined. I see ethics a little bit more as a behavioural pattern, whereas I see values a little bit more as things that people hold out to be important within an organisation.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Another question's come in. Going back to the whole piece around engaging employees, do you believe change can only happen by incentivising employees through money or career progression? Is it not better to engage people's hearts and minds to deliver because they want to, not simply for more cash or a promotion?
Absolutely, I would agree with that 100%. And to be honest, I'd almost go so far as if to say, well, are the people that you're hiring the right people if the only way to incentivise them is through money? I think we have to change. I think the whole point about people and the financial services organisation being seen as an industry that is only motivated by money is in essence where a lot of these problems have arisen. I think that's not to say that we're proposing caps on salaries or anything else. There's quite a nice phrase that I've seen used on several occasions that there's nothing wrong with getting rich, it's getting rich quick that creates many of the problems. And I think we can think of many industries, professional football or whatever it may be, that advocates a lot of that. But I think just going back to that point, it is so much more. And I think we need to change everything. It's very hard to change the culture of an organization when you still have short-term profit targets and short-term incentive goals that are focused around money in place. The two very much go hand in hand. Just changing incentive targets will not work. You've got to make people feel that they're getting something else and that there's some other change happening. Otherwise, there's an element of people who just go elsewhere. People have to feel, to think back to that question that we asked where we asked people how many people wanted to work and would prefer to work for an organisation with a better ethical reputation. That was an overwhelming 90-odd% response. So we genuinely feel that people perceive value in working in an organisation with stronger beliefs. So I genuinely think there is a trade-off to be had. But whilst that short-term culture exists, it's very hard to put in place any ethical changes. So I think the two very much go hand in hand. You can't have one without another. You can't have a hugely ethical organisation that is totally focused on short-term goals and short-term incentive plans that are contradicting the good of the clients. You need to have the two together, and that the two go hand in hand, which is exactly why the HR profession needs to be engaged in this process of changing culture.
Thanks, Kate. Well, unfortunately, we're running rapidly out of time. I'd just like to say, I think here at Changeboard we are noticing that on a broader level, across all industries, the global financial crisis has really forced employees more than ever to question ethics and values of leaders and the businesses they work for. And I think HR has a really crucial role to play in helping organisations rebuild trust and shape organisational values that employees can really connect with to help create a winning culture. Okay, so that just about concludes this afternoon's session. Just want to say thank you so much to Kate for the presentation and to the CFA. I think there's a wider piece there for HR professionals in all organisations, many of whom feel that their organisational culture maybe has been lost and as a result of the financial crisis of itself. So once again, a reminder that we'll be sending out the recorded version of this webinar later on this week, so please do look after that. And thank you for taking the time to attend the webinar today. We look forward to seeing you on another Change